My name is Bruce Barkhauer, and I serve as the Minister for Faith and Giving for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. I appreciate the invitation to be with you today. I've been asked to talk about stewardship, and specifically to address how things are changing in the context of a global pandemic and what we might expect to find on the other side of this life-altering event. Frankly, I'm not going to tell you a lot of things that you don't already know and have likely experienced, but hopefully our time together will cause you to reflect and reimagine some of the issues that you're dealing with. Let's be honest, COVID-19 has forced us to rethink a great many things about not only how we do church, but to explore perhaps for the first time in a generation what it means to be church. This has presented us with an opportunity to address the mechanics of how we worship and engage in ministry and mission in a sort of technical analysis and a systemic evaluation of how we transmit the grace of the gospel and our impact on society. We can't return to the normal of pre-COVID church, and frankly, I don't think we should want to. That's beyond what I've been specifically asked to address in this session, but those thoughts should be a part of the larger conversations we are having, and they impact stewardship. Specifically, with regard to stewardship, a form of a sort of technical perspective is to notice that without worship, there's been no regular passing of the plate. The resources we need for ministry and mission have in many churches been reduced, while our need for those resources has not changed nearly as much. Many churches depend on so-called loose offering, that which comes from donors who don't make a pledge or an estimate of giving. In some churches, that's the only source of income because it's the kind of context in which that particular planning tool of a pledge campaign or an estimate of giving card is not the norm. It may not even be appropriate in that context. So there are often people who give when they are only there for worship, and therefore when they're not there for worship, they don't give. This has greatly impacted churches who are still not meeting together. Now, electronic giving is one alternative for this, and it's been available for some time, but honestly, many churches had not considered using this convenience until the pandemic hit. Some churches then scrambled to get these systems in place, and frankly, because there wasn't time to talk about them or time to train people on how to use them, they really haven't caught on with full vigor in the congregation. We recommend putting information about your online system on your website, including a short tutorial video that demonstrates how to use a particular platform that your church utilizes. Checks remain popular for some members of our congregations, and also electronic transfers from accounts are an option. But as with electronic giving, this assumes that all of your members have access to banking services, which honestly in some communities of faith is not a reality. For a variety of reasons, including even the availability of banking in an area, or issues around documentation, or high service fees, or even cultural tradition, banks are not always an option, which means that cash is still the primary way donations are made. Now, since it's not a good idea to mail cash through the U.S. Postal Service, that's not really an option, so we have to think of other creative ways in which we can receive people's gifts. It's important to find a secure and easy way for members to contribute. That has to remain a priority. Now, this may mean finding a secure way to handle donations that are made at the church building during off hours. Security and safety need to be considered if you're going to do that. Simply putting a mail slot in the door so that envelopes fall to the floor on the other side of the door really isn't adequate. If you want people to leave donations in off hours when no one's in the building, consider a box that can be attached to the door in a secure way that can also be under lock and key. Now, you have to assume that such giving is going to attain a large percentage of cash, and you don't want those envelopes lying on the floor for whoever happens to come through the building next. Remember, too, that when that box is opened, there should be more than one person present and they shouldn't be related to each other, to help count and record the donations. That box should be treated the same way as you treat an offering plate in terms of protecting and accounting for the gifts of your people. Where the money comes from, of course, has also been impacted by the pandemic. Aside from not being able to pass the plate, the capacity of some of our donors has been greatly diminished by this pandemic. For congregations that have a high percentage of members in the service industry or the gig economy, this has been particularly devastating. Hours have been cut, jobs have been lost altogether, and people have gone from contributing to the church's mission to now needing to be a recipient of that same compassion in order to survive. Now, another revenue stream loss has been rental income. Perhaps you have a building and you've been renting out your space to a preschool, a daycare, or some other organization that's not been meeting regularly. Now, if your relationship has been one of simply acting as a landlord without building a relationship with your tenants, if you will, then your options here will be limited. However, if you've built meaningful relationships with those who use your space, you may be able to persuade them to contribute rent or something at least toward the expense of the space at a reduced rate while they wait to return to the building. This can help with short-term cash flow, and it's an incentive that you can offer that would extend that reduction of rate for a period of time once they come back in the building. And honestly, some cash flow is better than no cash flow. A reduced rent is better than no rent. In the same way, if you happen to be renting space from someone else, you may wish to pursue a similar arrangement for your church. It will guarantee that the space is available, and if you negotiate well, you may actually be able to save money over the long term, even if you have to pay for space you're not currently using. It never hurts to ask, and the worst answer you're likely to get is no, and any other answer is a bonus. Now, another thing I want to mention is it's fairly clear as it stands right now in many of our congregations, offerings alone and even the subsistence, the subsidy of a rent income is not going to be able to sustain the congregation for a long term unless the church is growing and thriving. If time allows, I want to offer a few thoughts about how to help your congregation thrive based on our experience and what's been revealed recently by several studies in the United States and Canada of congregations. But for now, let's just talk about those income streams. We've already mentioned rental, and here it's a chance for you to think creatively about what are the ways in which we can leverage the asset of our building if we own one? Who might be interested in using space from us? Are there certain parts of our building, like the kitchen, for example, that may have a particular value for someone who's wanting to work in the catering business, for example? If you have a recreational space, are there local teams that may want to come in and practice, even if they don't need your space for games? What if you have extra classroom space that's not being utilized? Maybe there's an artist who needs a studio to work in. If you can provide secure space, they might be willing to pay you for that space. Maybe a nonprofit organization needs an office in your neighborhood, in your community. It's a matter of thinking creatively about what space do we have and who might be able to use it, and then determining what that space is worth, what the value of that is to us and to our partners, and coming to an agreement that brings income from that asset of space in your building. Another thing to be thinking about in terms of income streams are who are our missional partners in the community? Who are the other agencies who are engaged in work that we feel called to do, whether it's a feeding program or a homeless program or an educational program? Who is doing these kinds of services in our community, who might be able to pool their resources with ours or ours with theirs to extend our work and our presence and, of course, the transforming power of that mission in the community in which we live? Who wants to invest with us to do this work? Who are the major donors that donate to that kind of work, either in time or money? It's good to look around and see who's at the Habitat Build or the soup kitchen line in the serving side on a Saturday morning when you're engaged in that kind of program, or wherever you are in the community, whatever the time or day. Who's around you? Get to know them and their names and see where their passions are. They may be very interested in supporting a work that you feel clearly called to do. Do you have a community foundation or other philanthropic agency that might want to support you? Larger communities are often gifted with those kinds of resources, but it takes a little imagination to see how the things that they see build better community fit with the things that you want to do in the name of the gospel, and how you can work together and keep things just separate enough so it's not them supporting a sectarian operation of a church, but supporting something that enriches the community in which you live. And when it comes to finding just individual donors, people ask me, well, how do we know where they are? And again, in a larger city, notice who supports the local theater or orchestra or ballet company, who's involved in the art museum or the science or children's museum in your community. Look for those high donors. See if you know any of them. You might be surprised. See if people you know any of them, who might give you access and in the door kind of opportunity to tell them about what God's calling you to do, to express your particular need, and to invite them to be a partner with you. Even cultural partners should be sought out. Who benefits from your church or the programs you offer or you might want to offer? In the community in which I live, not far away from us, is a city that does international business on a very large scale. And they have lots of folks who come to be employed from all over the world. And these are folks from different cultures than central Indiana. So the question is, how do we help those people get integrated into the community to find connectional systems that support them and build their life and make them happy and make them want to stay? The businesses in that town are very interested in making those kinds of connections. Do you have an employer like that in your community, or several employers who are bringing in good paying jobs, workers from other countries who you might be able to relate to, build a relationship with, and program to? The business might be very interesting in establishing that kind of a relationship with you. And again, it's be creative. We often think about English as a second language for people who are coming to this country from someplace else, and that may be needed. But what about Spanish as a second language, or Korean? What about the opportunity to teach our neighbors our language? Many are curious and would love to be able to converse with us. Maybe it's sharing other cultural resources that can build community. Cooking classes, art, workshops, history, holiday customs, festivals, ways that bring people together. Some of these you may charge a fee or a service fee for. Others may work on a donation-only basis or simply be an open door to build relationships for the future. And again, that local workforce might be interested in helping you teach Spanish to its English workers, simply to improve relationships or productivity in their own business. What are the ways you can reach out to build relationships that enhance your community and exercise and leverage the gifts and skills that you have to offer? And you can think of dozens more, I'm sure. These become pathways for other types of sharing. They're non-traditional ways that can eventually lead to building the worshiping life of your congregation with these people with whom you build community with, who now want to extend that into the exploration of faith and worship. When it comes to income streams, don't forget also about social service agencies like the Kiwanis, the Rotary, the Lions, the Optimist. Those types of civic groups often engage the community in particular ways. Firefighters, police associations, the local hospital may be wanting to address needs that you see in your neighborhood. And they may be interested in partnering with you, again, on sort of a separate from your church basis, but extending the work and mission and vision you have for your church. Other income streams to be considered, of course, are social media, GoFundMe platforms, and that type of way to engage people who can make a donation, large or small, to a particular work that you can tell a story about, of either what your dream is for how you believe it will change the community, or tell the actual story of how it's transforming lives right now, and they can be a partner in that. And another partner might be another congregation, maybe across town or across the country. Now, you want to avoid a relationship that wouldn't be egalitarian. You don't want to become someone's special project. This is more about partnership and investment. Again, it's built on relationship and trust and a sense of equality and partnership. And who do you know well enough that you might ask to explore those possibilities with, again, to accomplish a specific type of mission or ministry that needs to be done? And of course, don't ignore grants. Grants are offered for all types of experiences that happen in communities, again, designed to enrich that community and make it better, designed to improve it in lots of different ways. Now, grants are more challenging in the terms of the way in which one applies for them, the way in one has to keep records and account for what you're doing with the funds you receive and be able to essentially chart your success or failure in executing the grant, and how well what you said you would do turned out to be. So there's a lot of paperwork and record keeping, but you can find people within your own congregation who have these skills who can help you do that. It takes homework. Again, it's tying into one of the other agencies in town that can point you to, well, we're aware of a grant that so-and-so corporation offers. Have you ever checked with them when you're talking about a ministry you want to do? And then you follow up and pursue that. Now, not any one of these is going to be the final solution to solvency and permanent financial health in your congregation, but a combination of all of them can, and of course, doing good stewardship education as well. And so let's pick up on just a few things that are important to build a healthy congregation, one that is vital and one that we think will grow and flourish when you do these things. One is, of course, the clarity of your own vision. Do you know as a church what God has called you to do? Who God is calling you to be? And more importantly, not just your leadership, but do folks who sit in the pews every week have a sense of what that mission and vision is? Is it in their DNA? Does it run like a red through all of the systems of governance, decision-making, budgeting, staffing, and of course programming and mission that you make? Is it the ultimate arbiter of what you do or what you choose not to do? Simply having a vision statement isn't enough. It needs to really seep down into the soul of your people, so there's a real understanding that this is who we are, this is how God has gifted us, this is what we're going to do in the name of the risen Christ for transformation for ourselves and for our community around us. Now, I want to pick up on education again here. How well we teach stewardship does matter. Do we teach it as spiritual discipline? How effectively do we preach on stewardship as having to do with more than just money? Do we understand that stewardship is a whole life response to God, and that how we care for the earth, how we care for ourselves, how we care for the gospel, as well as how we care for our resources matters, that they reflect the nature of our relationship with God? Do we take time to teach on how money should be valued and what our proper relationship with money should be? And do we teach how to effectively manage money itself with a personal finance course and explore our own history and our own understanding of money and how we want it to work for us rather than the other way around? And then, of course, communication matters. How well are we telling our story? How well do we reach everyone? Do we take a one-size-fits-all approach, or do we target our communications to reflect the differences in ages and the composition of our audience? Do we use multiple channels of communication or just a single one? Are we using Facebook, email, Twitter, Instagram, newsletters, and first-class mail? All of which have different users, so we're reaching the right people with the right message. And have we set our expectations right? Do people understand that giving is a part of their discipline and discipleship, and it's a part of the way in which they have an opportunity to change the world for the things that God is doing to reflect more the values of the reign and kingdom of God? Mission needs to be resourced. It needs to have the money to become a reality, and so we shouldn't be embarrassed to ask people who have the capacity to give and to do so generously. Also, are we thanking people when they do give? Do we take time all through the year to let people know how grateful we are for the gifts they give us, whether it's time or money or other assets that they bring to bear for us to effectively carry out the work God has called us to do? Are we effectively saying thank you to people and expressing our gratitude and creating a culture of thanksgiving, recognizing that everything we have is a gift from God, that our giving isn't meant to prompt God to do something for us or to remind God that God, should be an advocate for us, but rather to proclaim that God has already done for us. God has already given us and blessed us with what we need. And so from a portion of that, we return in thanksgiving for God to utilize in the community in which we live. So we don't want to be afraid to ask, to invite people to join us on the journey. We want to dream big and hold out that transformative and life-giving idea and dare people to be a part of what God is doing or wants to do in the community. We're not embarrassed by this. We are excited by this. We feel called to this, to teach the faith as leaders, to model the pathway, and to encourage every good effort and give gratitude for every act of generosity. This is the pathway to effective spiritual stewardship, my friends. It's the pathway to effectively being the church that God has called us to be. Please remember that I'm available to you as a part of your being a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Again, my name is Bruce Barkhauer. The ministry is the Center for Faith and Giving, and you can reach us at centerforfaithandgiving.org on the internet, or my email is bbarkhauer@disciples.org. Thank you for this time, and I hope you have a great discussion about these ideas.